Hey everyone, welcome back to the Letter Drop podcast. The overall go-to-market is changing in the past couple of years, like macroeconomic conditions, AI. And so a lot of the playbooks that people have been using in the past decade aren't going to be the ones you want to be running in the future. And so on this podcast, what we do is we talk to folks who are really thinking about what the future of go-to-market, future of marketing really look like. And so today I'm really glad to have Casey Hill. He runs growth at ActiveCampaign. Used to work with a former coworker of yours who was a previous customer of ours, Jacob Rudnick. That's how I kind of discovered Casey. And he has some really great stuff that he puts out on LinkedIn. Recently saw him post a lot of interesting content around internally selling different growth experiments and campaigns at organizations and how you can bubble that up, as well as how AI is going to really change like what the future of marketing is going to look like in a fairly practical way, not just talking about like, oh yeah, AI is going to replace 95% of marketing jobs, but really like, what does that actually mean? Like, what are we going to be able to do that we couldn't do previously, which I thought was fascinating. And so really glad to have Casey on the pod today. Casey, do you want to introduce yourself to our audience? Give us the quick spiel on who you are and what you're up to.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Parthi. My name's Casey. I'm a senior growth manager at ActiveCampaign, which is a marketing automation tool. I've been in the SaaS space for a little over 10 years and kind of focused very specifically in SaaS roles and leadership positions in both kind of marketing and sales. About 4 to 5 years ago, I also started getting into institutional consulting. So working with McKinsey and BlackRock and other firms, advising around SaaS pricing, SaaS churn, a ton of different kind of components in that market. And then in the last 2 to 3 years, I also got quite involved in teaching. So I've taught at UCSD. I'm about to teach at Stanford Extension, teaching classes around demand generation and a lot of these different new age tactics, if you will, talking about community-led growth and influencers and how social is changing, some issues like that. So that's a little bit of my background.
Amazing. Yeah, you're kind of the renaissance man of growth over here. There's like teaching, institutional advising. I see your LinkedIn. You just talk about everything and anything under the sun. So I'm very excited about this. Let's just try to focus this down to one thing that you mentioned recently, which was helping companies or businesses really understand how to do something new. And very specifically, you talked about a new initiative at ActiveCampaign to grow via LinkedIn. I'm guessing you meant like organic LinkedIn, sort of like social selling, brand building, that kind of stuff over there. And I can imagine a lot of companies, especially a company that's ActiveCampaign's size, if you haven't done that before, there's a lot of people you need to convince in order to get the organization to be bought into a sort of like new channel or something that you want to try for the first time. So tell me a little bit more about that, like about your LinkedIn journey specifically, and maybe more broadly, like what is your advice to people on how they should go about thinking about organizational change and selling growth experiments?
Yeah, it's a great question. A lot of nuance to it. So I'll maybe start with talking specifically about what we've done with LinkedIn as a growth channel and kind of how I sold that initially and how it's going. So I think the first part of this that's really important is whenever you are trying to sell something, a growth experiment, you want to sell the system. Meaning that when I came in, I don't say, hey, I'm Casey, I'm getting millions of views on LinkedIn. We should invest a bunch in my profile for that to grow, because it's just a high risk. If I leave 3 months from now, that's something that they're going to feel like they're losing that momentum. And that's often one of the barriers for folks. So the first thing I let folks know is that this needs to be a team buy-in. I need leadership bought into the concept that we're going to train up the team. We're going to bring in dozens of people from sales, dozens of people from marketing, get these people sharing. And then if I leave in 3 months, we still have this sustainable engine that continues to bring back that attention for ActiveCampaign. So I think that's one of the first components. The second component when you're kind of selling in is I think you want to make sure that you have reference points. So go to people who are doing it well in market. Find the people who have the most successful LinkedIn engines. So in our market, you see the Gongs, you see the HubSpots, you see all these different brands that have built really effective footprints on channels like LinkedIn. Ask them about their numbers. Ask them about how they approached it. Ask them about what's working and what's not working. I think folks would be amazed at how open a lot of go-to-market leaders are, and even how many of those folks have shared much of this information publicly in the past. So now you're selling a system and you're providing specific references now and reference points. And then the third side of it, I think, is as you're trying to get folks on board, I think that you really want to try to take a layered approach. So when I was pitching the system, what I said is, here's what I want to do. I want to get our team posting. But in addition to that, I want to run what I call a voice of the customer campaign. I want to get our partners and I want to get our customers talking about why did they come to ActiveCampaign? What are their favorite features? What are top results they're seeing? And I had a concerted effort to have that type of content going live at the same time as content that our team was producing. And then I had our paid team amplify the best of both of those categories. So the best performing posts from our internal team and the best performing posts from our customers. The byproduct of this layered approach is that every department of that, the voice of the customer, the paid, and the organic side are all amplified by that kind of cross-pollination. And that was something that was also informed by talking with a lot of other go-to-market leaders, like Aircall shared an example during one of the last SaaStr meetings about how they've heavily leaned into this layered approach. And they actually go to a specific demographics, like they'll choose New York City and they'll do phone booths and they'll do subways and they'll do in-person events and they'll do localized ads and they'll do flyers. And they found a lot of success from just doing all of these different approaches layered in that same specific area. So there's a lot of ways it can look. But I think if you follow that blueprint of trying to make sure that you're selling a system, providing them specific references, having a layered approach, and the final thing is, I think you want to think thoughtfully about what your leading indicators are. So if you choose a social platform, what you're often going to find is that it's not going to immediately lead to revenue in 2 weeks from now, right? It's not like a paid ad. There is a curve there. So what you want to start doing is, what are the leading indicators? Maybe it starts with impressions. What's more valuable than impressions is actual engagements or conversations. What's more valuable than those comments are actual DMs or inbound messages with intent around your platform. So you want to start tracking those specific pieces as you're going along. That's what's ultimately going to lead you to have the most success.
Awesome. And how do you think about opportunity costs over here? So, right, when you're selling into your organization, you're selling to leadership, it takes resources to do anything new. And so they're really thinking about, okay, like what else should we be doing, or what is this distracting Casey and team from? How do you help them understand it, especially when you're not going to be able to show them like immediate numbers, as you pointed out with social, right? This is like a compounded effort. How do you think about navigating those kinds of objections?
Yeah, for sure. So I think there's a couple components of it. Number one is the more that you have realism from outside reference points. Like when I go to start a podcast, I went and talked to Kieran, who launches Marketing Against the Grain, and just asked him, like, what were your benchmarks? What did you guys look at? And he talked about the build phase during those first 6 months and then their monetization phase afterwards and what those numbers specifically look like. So as a brand that was, at that time, probably close to in a similar stage where we're at, having those direct reference points of someone who's in industry, I think that is a starting point that builds a lot of confidence. The next thing is really just focusing on what are the specific goals of the organization and how do those align to the timelines of different growth plays. So for example, if someone says, I think that we really need to build long-term levers. We need to invest in things like SEO and things like community and things like podcast, because we want to create that growing curve over time that is going to be that like continuous pipeline. That's one equation that we're in. Another equation that we're in is like we need like sales now. Like the CRO has come in and they're like, we need this quarter. We need to go all out at everything we can. That's totally fine. I would then recommend different growth plays. Then maybe we look at influencer oriented plays, partner go-to-market plays. Like there's a bunch of things that we can do that are more short term. They might not have the longevity and they might not have the pipeline generation potential, but they're going to be able to say close, hey, 30 people close on this webinar and 10 people close on this event. And we can start to do things that have that specific focus. So really when it comes to opportunity cost, I think it's just having that candid conversation with management. Where are we? in terms of our pipeline? Like, do we have a really full pipeline and we just need to spend a bunch of time converting? Awesome. Let's go spend time bottom of the funnel. Let's have the focus be there. Let's draft those emails that are going to activate that existing pipeline, and let's just hammer there. But if that pipeline doesn't exist, if our problem is that we're not getting enough people through the door, then we're going to have to take a step back and say, hey, if we want to do this the right way, we want to build sustainable pipeline, we're going to have to do some stuff that has a longer time horizon. But I want you to have confidence in the leading indicator. So what I'm going to do is go to different people in the market who you know and respect. I'm going to try to have those conversations, and I'm going to try to come back to you with data so that we choose the right leading indicators that tell us when we should kind of double down or when we should pivot.
Gotcha. Something that I really appreciate about your answers are how you sort of understand how to talk to leadership and how you're always sourcing this in either data or at least like references that people can kind of grok. I think a lot of marketers I talk to, they're almost dogmatic about the things that they want to do. And they're like, hey, like we need to do a podcast or we need to do this, and justify it with a lot of stuff that could maybe be classified as like hand wavy or fuzzy. And that, if anything, hurts credibility and makes it harder for you to make an argument for something that might actually be net positive for the organization, the right thing to do. It's more about the way in which you communicate it that makes it hard for folks to actually be bought into it. Awesome. So let's actually segue into something else over here, Casey. So we talked about selling leadership on change and doing new things. Something that a lot of marketing teams are thinking about right now is just essentially how should they be thinking about AI? And different people are using AI in different ways. Many in like not so smart ways. I must add. I think there's this whole use case of AI in marketing, which just creates a sea of sameness. And maybe you're producing output, but that output is not necessarily doing anything for you in terms of actually driving pipeline or ultimately revenue. And so let's talk about how companies should be talking about change in AI, what they should be maybe thinking about adopting today, and where you see the future going there about AI within marketing, and how people should think about this transition and having those kinds of conversations internally at their companies.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So another very complex, very nuanced kind of pointed discussion. So I think that first is to have a AI first mentality and have an exploratory kind of perspective when it comes to your business. So where AI is at right now is there's a lot of mundane tasks and mundane functions that AI can plug into and solve for as it stands. And sometimes it's almost as good as a human, sometimes it's at 80%, but there's so many tools. Like, I was just experimenting recently with something called Opus Clip that can take video and can create short form videos. There's tons of different brands out there that are innovating on ways that we formerly did things. And I think it's important for brands to look at their overall business processes, from their content generation to how they do video, to how they do podcasting, to how they do outreach, how your SDRs and BDRs function, and ask, is there routine processes or flows that we can use AI to make us substantially more productive? So that's, I think, stage one as a company, is just being exploratory and leaning into that. I think that's where we start. I think that over time, you're going to see some very dramatic changes happening in AI. I think the way that these things tend to function is that AI gets more valuable over time, right? The more information that you feed into a system, the more that it learns and understands. So this next evolution is you're going to have almost a data moat in some ways that is going to occur when people are using software. It's learning about the customers. So I'll use an example. I work for ActiveCampaign. We're a marketing automation platform. What's going to happen is that the tools are going to learn exactly when people like to be engaged with, exactly where they click, exactly what patterns or behaviors on a website are then going to lead to a purchase behavior. Many of these things are trackable right now in different ways, but it's fairly generalized. It gives you like a persona or a general forecast, or it can tell you, hey, overall, we would assign X number of points but it's not personalized to the degree that it is going to become. I believe the next wave of this is everything is going to be hyper personalized to the individual and based on their patterns. But what's going to be required is it's going to take time to learn that person's patterns. So what's going to happen is the longer that people stay within the system, the better that AI is going to essentially serve them. So it's interesting from a number of perspectives. For one is that you see all this news about how NRR is declining. There's all this news that shows overall as an industry, we see NRR decline. Well, one of the things that you're going to see is that the best AI forward companies, I think, are going to buck and turn around that trend because their tools are just going to become more valuable over time. And that's going to directly lead to less churn and more expansion. So I think that's going to be an interesting movement forward. I think the other side of this is right now, a huge amount of time is spent on process. So like in my industry in marketing automation, people ask, well, how frequently should I contact people? Right? Like, what should my templates look like? What should my subject lines look like? There's all of this nuance. When should I use a fork logic at this point? And when should I segment this group versus that group? I think almost all of those things are going to become automatic. All of those things are going to be informed by big data. Big data is essentially going to run through. It's going to see based on 1 billion interactions what those best paths are, and it's going to help create those automatically. And things like the tempo and frequency and all of those are going to shift in real time. So I think that what is going to become more critical and is going to become more important is the creativity side. Less around process, less around system, and more around genuine creativity informing the best, highest differentiating content. And right now, that's kind of the barrier, right? AI can actually, this is a misconception. People say that AI can't be creative. AI can actually be incredibly creative if you are creative as the inputter, right? As you, the marketer, are feeding it that creative vision, it can help that coalesce. So I think that's where we're going in terms of the marketers that are going to win. And I think you're going to see more and more investment into marketers that are on that spectrum from really good manager to say visionary. If we were to look at that spectrum from a leader, one person like really good at systems, really good at process, the other person more on the visionary side of the spectrum, I think that visionary side of the spectrum is going to start to become even more valuable due to that changing shift that is going to happen through AI.
Yeah, so basically it's, if I had to recap that, number one, we're going to see more data collection and data moats essentially, which help AI systems essentially do things that probably weren't really possible previously, like the number of man hours required for the level of personalization or understanding of the business would have just been exorbitant. And then the second thing I'm hearing is just the process stuff, something that previously would require a operationally driven sort of like consultant type person or someone who just really understands how do I drive efficiency within an organization. And they do that today via a lot of spreadsheets and SOPs and documented processes and just making sure everybody's doing the right thing so that you can make those kinds of micro decisions. Like tooling is just going to take care of that for you. It's going to be able to identify and say like, hey, like you look like a somebody else who's done this 100 times, or I think here's an opportunity for you to just like make this micro decision as opposed to you having a human going through a decision tree and being like, okay, I need to do this one thing and plug in the cap. Gotcha. Can you give me give me some examples of that? Like, what do you think is possible today in terms of like a very practical example of what do you think is possible today, and what do you think is going to be possible in a year or 2 years from now in terms of something very practical that you're going to see in terms of AI and marketing?
Yeah, for sure. So just in terms of like our lens, what is already possible right now is you can go in and you can type in and say, I want to set an automation where I follow up every 3 days with someone. And if they don't buy a product, then I want, like, you can write out what you want and click enter, and it will actually just build that whole flow for you automatically. So that's there right now. And you can do that inside of the top tools in this space, like ActiveCampaign. I think that exactly as you articulated before, the next stage is going to be that deep personalization and kind of almost intelligence that evolves from it. I think the other thing that's going to get really interesting is the kind of like monetization paths. So a really good example of this is Reddit. We know Reddit just signed a $60 million deal with Google where they're licensing out one of the largest pools of unindexed content thus far. Well, all of this proprietary data that lives in these different hubs, whether that's Reddit or Quora or these individual companies that are generating billions of different unique data points they have within their systems, that information is incredibly valuable. So the other interesting part about this is when I look at a company like Reddit, I'm not very interested in their ad strategy arm. That makes up 98% of their revenue as it stands. But when I look at that, I'm like, their average revenue per user is like $3.50 compared to $40 on a place like Facebook. They're just not very efficient with that lever. But what's very interesting about a company like Reddit is how they monetize their APIs, how they license the data that they have to LLMs. That could kind of pave out this new path and this new monetization lever for brands. So I think that's something that I don't know exactly what that's going to look like in the years ahead, but it definitely could be another route as we look at how companies grow. In the past, we've seen like, hey, they grow as they reach scale, they go to multi-product, they implement these different usage-based pricing models. There's all these conventional steps that companies do along the scaling journey. It'll be very interesting to see what the monetization of the data components itself, where that lands.
Absolutely. In terms of marketers starting to collect their own data and build their own data moats, is there anything that you think teams should be paying attention to in terms of their own email lists, their own data that they're storing in their data warehouse, website data, traffic data, like how people are engaging on social platforms? What do you think current marketing teams should be doing to prepare themselves to have that sort of like defensibility or moat when AI systems are able to actually leverage them?
Yeah, a couple things I would note. So, number one is I do think that it's important, even at this stage right now, I would be gathering information with consent whenever you can. I think what's going to happen is that there's going to be optionality where brands are going to basically have to say, hey, do you want all of this personalized or tailored stuff or not? Right. And getting that buy in, I think, is going to be an important part of this. I think we're naive to not think that there's going to be substantial privacy legislation that comes around this. We've already seen this. It's happened again and again and again across the industry. I come from the email space and I've seen at least 4 massive shifts from GDPR to the Apple Auto Opens to the recent changes with Yahoo and Apple. So it's always happening. So one is thinking about that, getting people aligned and being very clear about how do you want to be communicated with and getting that buy-in and that relationship building with your audience. The other thing I think too is even right now, it is amazing to me how many brands don't gather any kind of information up front when people come through the door. Like someone opts in for your newsletter, and the only piece of information that's gathered is email. And I think that's a miss. This is a war that I fought for many, many years, and there's many different opinions on it. I think that you can kind of have the best of all worlds by using strategies like progressive profiling, where you gather an email and then it takes them to another stage of the form where you ask additional information. But one of the reasons, like I've been in the email space for a long time, and one of the dirty secrets is that everyone talks about personalization. I can tell you that 80% of those brands do no real personalization beyond merging someone's name in, because I've looked at a lot of the systems and I've been behind the hood. And one of the reasons that they don't do a ton of personalization is because they aren't gathering the information. So what are they going to personalize if they don't know the top pain points? If they don't, it's going to be much more challenging for them to do meaningful personalization. So I think the other side of this is if you're building an email newsletter, if you're building an owned asset, I encourage folks to ask for the most relevant information that helps you serve up better experiences. And I also tell people, if you're going to only ask like one question, people say, well, Casey, okay, I can only ask one question. Should I ask for role? Should I ask for company size? Should I ask for industry? And to me, the answer is what is most relevant to your customers in terms of the content you serve up? Meaning that if the answer is e-commerce businesses and SaaS businesses function completely differently, so I really just need to ask industry. That's cool. That makes sense. But you might find that a 5,000 person e-commerce business is more similar to a 5,000 person B2B SaaS business. The problems they have, the roles and permissions, the security things that they care about. And so actually it's company size that is the better variable for you to segment based on that. That's something that you have to figure out as an organization, but definitely something I encourage folks going in. Add in that personalization question, but think very thoughtfully about how you're going to use it to add value to a customer.
Absolutely. And I feel like that's something that um, we're thinking a lot about it. So we're also in like Martech. I guess like you guys are really focused on email. What we're focused more on is the pure content side of things. And we're thinking a lot about data collection and not necessarily email, but more so understanding consumption behavior or what does the buyer journey look like. So everything from what are people consuming on LinkedIn, right? If they're coming in from social or anything along those lines, what are they engaging with? What are they commenting on? To what they're reading on your website, to what are they asking on sales calls or customer success calls, to actually kind of like build that profile on a buyer so that you can actually understand, hey, what are those touch points which eventually led to someone being a successful buyer. Can you then use that information to inform what you do next in terms of your future campaigns? You know that these types of assets or these types of posts or these types of content, like this case study and this blog post and this LinkedIn post, are the ones that historically worked. You should be redistributing those LinkedIn posts, reposting about on the same topic. You should be taking some of those assets and content and using platforms like ActiveCampaign to be pushing that out to the right people on your newsletter. You should be looking at what people are asking on these calls and understanding like, hey, like these are the blockers to me actually buying, and that informs, okay, like here's the sales enablement I need to do, here's the net new content I need to produce in order to get the rest of the audience to actually be unblocked and buy as well. So definitely thinking about the same stuff over here at Letter Drop as well. But I think like every go to market organization, go to market company is really trying to figure out, okay, like what are the different data points we collect to make sure that AI is actually useful, as opposed to I think where we are today, which is just like raw chat GPT or like raw LLM. And everybody has access to the exact same stuff. And that's why you also see the sea of sameness, and which is not helpful from a marketing
I
angle.
want to point to a couple companies I think that are doing an awesome job with kind of the next stage of this. So Zapier is one of them. Zapier just released Zapier Central. And why it's so interesting is it's looking at all of your internal data, it's pulling it in, but it's being taught and it's getting more sophisticated over time. So it's this thing that is evolving with you and showing that increasing value and helping you prioritize certain core things within the business over time. So similar to what Intercom is doing with their chatbot functionality, which I think has this very evolving capacity, Zapier and Intercom are two examples of AI first companies that I think are taking that next step, which is helping look at all of that data that you have and helping kind of have this progressive piece that grows. But yeah, I think it is very challenging. Right now, we aren't at the stage where AI can help us perfectly identify all the best variables to focus on. So it's kind of a little bit of we have to try our best to build those personas. And I think as AI continues to get better, we'll continue to see that enhancement coming in.
How do you think companies should think about like taking those kinds of bets, right? Because people are, you're kind of putting you're putting yourself out there when you ask for something. You're like, hey, like we want to go and try to adopt this new AI system. I think a lot there right now in the market, there's a lot of like over promising and under delivering, and I think people have to be wary about, okay, like what is actually feasible and what is possible. I want to be on the cutting edge. I want to be thinking about how this is evolving, but at the same time, I want to make sure that I don't overpromise to my leadership team and get myself into a position where I'm like, well, you spent all this money, you bought this stuff, you tried all these new programs, and you don't necessarily have a lot to show for it. But it's still important for that team to evolve and like think about how things are changing.
Yeah, I mean, one of the ways that I think about this is, and I'm a networker, right? So I spend a lot of time talking with other go-to-market leaders, and I kind of know the people in my head. I'm like, okay, this is the extreme techno optimist. I know that they're adopting every kind of AI functionality they can, and I know where they sit on that spectrum. And I know the people who are very reluctant, they're a little bit slower moving, and I constantly have conversations with both camps. What are you doing? What are the results that you're seeing? What is actually occurring on board? ultimately, all these things we're talking about, we started by talking about social plays and different go-to-market plays. Now we're talking about AI. Ultimately, everything has to culminate in an increase in productivity and an increase in growth. The question is, what are the leading indicators and how do we know when to double down or when to pivot or when to change gears, right? So I think the recommendation I would have on that is continue to talk to people in the market who have a different lived experience, who are testing different tools, who maybe have been behind the hood of these different things for periods of time, and have those candid conversations. And I think if you build that right network, it'll be an incredible boon to you, because you're not going to have the ability to test every system, to test all these tools, but there will be many other people out there who will be going through these different processes, and you can get a little bit more mired in reality through that process.
Absolutely. Well, Casey, this was a fantastic conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time to share a little bit about what you think the future of AI in marketing looks like. I'm also very excited for all the stuff that ActiveCampaign has coming out around that. I am envisioning a world in which ActiveCampaign can just like build out all of my email marketing processes and figure out who needs to see what, which sounds like it's closer than one may think. If people want to find you online or reach out to you, where's the best place to look for you?
Yeah, so if you just want to go to LinkedIn, I talk all the time on LinkedIn. My name is Casey Hill, Casey, last name Hill, Hill. Feel free to drop me a DM and message anything organic growth, AI, email marketing, marketing automation. I'm happy to provide whatever context I can.
Appreciate it, Casey. Thanks for joining the pod.